So, today we're going to be talking about avoiding power struggles. This topic was requested by one of the participants last week, and I thought it was a good one for us to go on. Like I said, please jump in if you have any questions or if you want any clarifications, and I'm happy to do that, or we can put it to the crowd and see if other people have strategies that they may be using at home that are working. My name's Tiffany Cochran. I am a board certified behavior analyst. I'm director of autism advocacy and intervention here in Vermont. And I'm working in a partnership with Head Start locations in the Northeast Kingdom before the school closures and now through these trainings. We also have another AAI staff with us. Her name is Sarah. She's a registered behavior technician, and she was working in a Head Start location supporting some of the children there. She's here today to help us out, take notes about your questions, and give some of her input as well. And then after the training is complete, we'll post it on the Autism AI website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you ever want to go back and find these trainings later, you can go through our website or find our YouTube page. Okay, so let's jump right in. Today we're talking about power struggles. So what really is a power struggle? I looked up the definition. It's pretty simple. It's just a fight for control. I think that's, boiling it down to the most basic description of what a power struggle is. I think when we all think about our own lives, everybody's been in some sort of power struggle at one point or another, whether that's with a child or with another family member, maybe in your work life. Nobody's immune to getting into power struggles, so I think it's a really good topic to talk about. And the strategies we're talking about today are focused on parents and children, but they really apply across all relationships in your life and all types of power struggles in your life. One of the sort of characteristics I want to think about with a power struggle is that all of the people who are participating in that power struggle are either seeking different outcomes or seeking a different path to the same outcome. And that's where the disagreement comes in a lot. When you're working with your kids, they might have it set in their mind how they want to do something or when they want to do something. So it's really important to recognize opportunities to allow them to be autonomous and allow them to, exercise their free will. But sometimes they do need to follow adult instructions, and it's much more difficult to do that if you start getting into a power struggle with your kids. Some common power struggles, and I'm sure this list is endless, but ones I could think of pretty quickly, were getting access to screen time or other preferred activities, or ending screen time. Cleaning up, I think that's a big one. Bedtime is one that I hear a lot about from parents. And then just generally delaying a task. So you're asking them to do something and they don't want to do it yet. Maybe they want to keep doing what they're doing right now. So that's definitely a power struggle that a lot of families I work with have struggled with as well. So I want to give you this idea of a power struggle kind of being like a tug of war. The goal of tug of war is to win, right? You want to pull your opponent, across, or pull the flag across the center line. You're really trying to change the outcomes for yourself and for another person. And when you're in a power struggle, you're in this constant tug of war back and forth. There's really no way to break out of that without changing your strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today is how do you change your strategy? How do you go from this pull back and forth trying to get to a outcome? How do you get from there to working together to get that outcome? So the first thing I would recommend is in developing your strategy is to identify some patterns. And what I really mean by this is really start thinking about What is actually going on? What's contributing to to the opportunity for a power struggle to happen? The first thing I would suggest that you do is make a list of common power struggles you're experiencing with your children. So, this is different for every person, and I think a lot of them probably overlap across people, but really if you make a list, it helps you focus your attention on an intervention to make it so those power struggles don't come up. And then once you've made that list, choose one or more if you're feeling ambitious of the items on the list. And then I want you to answer these questions about that power struggle. First, what do you want the outcome to be? You, the parent, the guardian, the caregiver, what do you want the outcome to be? And then what does the child want the outcome to be? If the outcome is the same, you're already, on the right path. If you're working towards the same thing, then you're really looking at, okay, we can make some negotiations on how it gets done or when it gets done. But if the outcomes are completely different, which often they are, then you have a little bit more work to do on that. And then be really honest with yourself. What is the actual outcome? Typically, when a power struggle occurs, the outcome is that one person gives in or gives up and the other person persists on. And with our kids, it kind of reminds me of one of the topics we covered last week with choosing your battles. A lot of times, power struggles come out of that place where you are maybe picking your battles and might be giving in from time to time. Not to say that that's how it is all the time, but really identifying what the actual outcome usually is going to help you understand a little bit more about how you can avoid that. And I do have an example on the next slide, so I'll show you, a little example of this. And then, are there situations when or where a power struggle is more likely to occur? These are things like time of day, like maybe bedtime's harder, or after meal times could be harder. Kinds of activities. A lot of parents maybe struggle with having kids come inside after playing outside, or struggle with having kids clean up after playing with certain types of toys. I think one of the big ones I think of is like if you get a train set out and you set up the whole train set and then it's time to clean up, that can be a really, really hard time to get your child to clean that up. And then, are there certain locations where power struggles are more likely? Some kids are more likely to be pushy with their parents in public places, or more likely to engage in those behaviors at home. And then, are there any differences in the person who's presenting the demand? And sometimes this is something that a lot of families I work with struggle with. If one parent says you need to clean up and the other parent is like you need to clean up but then gives in and doesn't make them clean up, that can set up the parent who's more likely to follow through to end up with the brunt of the power struggle. So it's really important to be on the same page with the other caregivers too. And then, is there anything that could have made it worse? And what I really mean by this is being a little introspective with yourself. Was there, something that you may have said or did or asked of them that made the situation worse or made it escalate? And when you're talking about power struggles, it is really important to look at this as it's not just your child who's in a power struggle, it's both of you. So you can really control what your behaviors are in this situation, and through the caregiver controlling their own behaviors, they're going to have better control over their child's behaviors in that situation as well. And then this one's probably the most important. What has worked in the past? So when I say worked, I don't necessarily mean giving in, because that's avoiding a power struggle, yes, but it's still not reaching the desired outcome. What I really mean is there a strategy you've used in the past that has worked where you were able to reach your desired outcome and get there without having a power struggle or maybe the child having a meltdown or anything like that? And then this one, we'll come back to this a few different times. Was the demand that you were placing reasonable? A good example of this is telling a child to clean up is a reasonable demand, but when it's a huge mess and maybe they are overwhelmed by it, it might not be reasonable for the demand to be clean up. It might be more reasonable to break that down into smaller steps, like clean up all the blocks and then clean up all the books. So these questions will help you really understand a little bit more about why the power struggle is happening and about the sort of contributing factors to that power struggle occurring. So here's an example. The example is the parent wants the child to clean up their toys. The child wants to watch some TV right now. They don't want to clean up the toys. So in this example, the parent ends up cleaning up the toys while the child is watching TV. And this is kind of an example of giving in and not holding the child to the initial demand. So in this example, the situations where power struggle is more likely is when the TV was already on, or maybe when the child is tired or hungry and they're less likely to follow a request at that point. Or maybe when a sibling is present. That's a big one. If one child makes a mess in the room, there's a tendency to look at the sibling and be like, well, you need to help clean it up too, even though that sibling may not have contributed to the mess. And then what may have made it worse? Well, the child's left toys out in the past, so they have a history of knowing that they can just leave the toys out. Or the mess could have been overwhelming, so that brings us back to the same point that I was saying before of breaking things up into smaller tasks or activities. And then what's worked in the past? Maybe you've had a lot of luck in the past making a game out of cleaning up, or cleaning up as you go instead of having all of the toys out at once. Maybe using a countdown to cleaning up or timers or something like that. And then the last question is, was the demand that you were placing reasonable? Yes, the child cleaning up the toys is totally reasonable. But again, I would bring you back to that idea of, is there a way you could break it down into a smaller task to make it more doable? So next, we're talking about avoiding power struggles. So what you really want to do once you've really thought about what contributes to a power struggle between you and your child is recognize the signs of a power struggle coming on. Recognize those moments where the child might be more likely to start a power struggle with you, and use that knowledge to be able to intervene early and not get to the point where the power struggle and the back and forth has started. You don't want to get into that tug of war game. You want to prevent the power struggle from happening while still reaching the same desired outcome. You know, with the cleaning toys example, you're still hoping that the child cleans up the toys themselves instead of you having to do it or having, full-blown tantrums. So if you're able to recognize the contributing factors to the power struggle, you're really able to head them off a lot quicker. So some things you could do are some prevention strategies, like providing a reminder of the upcoming activity, just saying to your child before you're expecting them to end the activity they're doing, giving them a little like, hey, in 5 minutes we're going to clean up and it'll be time for bath time. You can use a timer to signal the end of the activity. I would pair that with the reminder though, and then it's not you placing the demand, it's the timer went off, it's time for cleanup, or it's time to come to the dinner table, or time to come inside, whatever it might be. I find that first then statements are very helpful when you're trying to make your expectations clear and your outcomes clear. So if the child wants to watch TV, then if you use a first then statement, such as first clean up your toys, then you can watch TV, it really helps them understand that once I'm done with this, I am getting access to what I want. And that sets up a situation where both the parent and the child are achieving the outcomes they're hoping to achieve. And then if you use a daily schedule, or if you have a pretty solid daily routine in your home, you could always refer back to your daily schedule. So if you're trying to get your child to go from playing to bath time, then you can just refer back to the schedule, like, hey, you know what, you've been playing for a while, and then next is bath time. So this is what we do every day, so we're going to just keep doing it again today. And then it's always good to remind the child of when what they want will be an option. Sometimes the things that kids ask for are never going to be an option. Like, we're never going to let them play with knives. We're never going to let them drive the car. Those things you just say no. But a lot of times the things that they're asking for are actually pretty reasonable. And it's just a matter of it not being reasonable at the time that they're asking, or it not being the expectation at the time that they're asking. So if you can tell them when it's going to be available again, that's usually pretty helpful. I also just want to throw in, try to avoid using, I guess what I would call like empty threats. So you don't want to say, if you don't clean up your toys, I'm going to throw them all away. You're never going to throw all their toys away. Or if you do, I mean, I've yet to see a parent who's done it, but you don't want to set up a situation where they learn to not believe what you say the consequence is going to be. So if the consequence is going to be, if you don't clean up your train set, I'm packing it away and putting it away, then you actually should pack it away and put it away for a couple days. And there's nothing wrong with decreasing the amount of toys or decreasing access to something to help the child understand that that your expectations are something that they need to follow through on. And then early on, before a power struggle starts, this is the time for any compromise or negotiation. This is a time where you can really talk to your child about what their wants are and what they're hoping to get out of this situation. But once a power struggle has started, and really when I think of a child with a power struggle, it usually is a lot of whining, a lot of repeated questioning, that kind of thing. Once you've reached that point where you're starting to get into a power struggle, there's no room for compromise there, because you're teaching your child by compromising once they've already escalated their behavior, that the behavior escalation is required to get what they want. So you always want to compromise when everybody's calm, when you have the most rational child in front of you. And then just remember to be reasonable in your expectations. I said this before, but just make sure that what you're asking of them is something they actually know how to do, or is reasonable in the sense that it's not completely overwhelming and they don't see an end to what you're asking. This is a big one when it comes to cleaning up, especially. If you get all of the blocks out and the whole train set out and all of the Matchbox cars and all of the dolls and they're all out at once, just telling them to clean up is extremely overwhelming. You'd want to break that down into smaller steps. Even though they are 100% capable of cleaning up all of those items, just breaking it down into, first let's clean up the blocks, and then holding out a bin for them to put the blocks in, and really participating in the cleanup with them, but having them be the primary person who does it, because they were the ones that made the mess. They're the ones who should clean it up. And then a little bit more on compromise. So compromise and negotiation, like I said, it should really only occur when both you and the child are calm. That is really the only time for compromise and negotiation. Again, if you are compromising with your child once their behavior is already escalated, they are really learning that that pattern of behavior gets you to the point where you give in a little bit. So compromising before they escalate, before you even give the initial demand, that's the right time, because they're learning that their calm and rational, their calm bodies and rational words are what leads to them getting a favorable outcome. So, offering choices can be a form of compromise. Choices can, even if it's as much as, do you want to clean up the dolls first or do you want to clean up the cars first? Um, it's kind of a forced choice where they're still cleaning up, but the choices lead the child to feel like they have a little bit of control in the situation. And then offering access to the child's request following the completion of the parent's request is a form of compromise. And this is where you use that first then language. This is a really powerful tool because if you're able to understand what your child is hoping to have in a given situation, then you are able to motivate them to complete the task you're asking them to complete. Then kids asking for something like 1 more minute or just until the end of this video, those are reasonable compromises in a lot of situations. I don't think I would be able to talk to even any adult who wants to stop watching a funny video before the end of it because they have to move on to something else. They always you want to finish what you're doing. And I think it's reasonable to allow kids a small amount of time to finish what they're doing. Say you're in the middle of a half-hour TV show, a compromise might be, okay, I can see that you're still watching that show. Let's press pause. You can come back to it after. And then really, have them work through the thing that they're required to do or that you're asking them to do, and then give them access to the thing that they were using afterwards. And then a really good tool, I've actually seen this in a lot of the Head Start classrooms when kids are cleaning up things that they're building. Sometimes they get a chance to save stuff for later. So if they have like a cool little, city built with blocks and they want to go back and play with it during the next playtime, in some of the Head Start classrooms, it's okay for the kids to do that if they ask appropriately. So, the train set's a good example. So if the train set's out and the child wants to play with it after dinner, that's an okay compromise. Okay, you can clean that up when you're done playing with it after dinner. And even art projects, if they want to come back to an art project later, you could say, let's put this up here on the counter for now and we'll take it out again later and you can add to it. So that's a reasonable compromise for kids. Okay, so here's what I recommend that you do if you're actually in a power struggle. So you might have missed the early signs, and then you find yourself sort of in this back and forth where you feel like you're arguing with your child to have them do something you're asking. So the biggest thing that you need to do is really just follow through with whatever expectation you have set. And again, you've already looked at, is this a reasonable expectation? Because if it's not, you might want to reassess what you're saying and change the expectation a little bit. But if it's reasonable, then you move forward with this sort of process. First, you're going to state the expectation clearly and using the simplest language possible. When you're already in a power struggle, you want to avoid long explanations. You want to avoid a lot of language because the child's behavior has already escalated at this point. They're already at the point of, going back and forth with you, and you're probably already feeling a little frustrated and escalated at this point as well. So clearly state what the expectation is. Use very simple language. If you need to, you can still break it into smaller steps. And sometimes it's helpful to use a little empathetic statement to let you know you've heard their request. So, going back to the example that I had earlier of cleaning up versus watching TV, quickly saying to your child, I hear what you're saying, you want to watch TV, but right now is time for cleanup. You can watch TV later. That's a very clear expectation. It's a calm but firm voice. But it does validate what the child is saying and let them know that you're hearing what they're saying. You're not just ignoring them completely. But on the topic of ignoring, and this comes back to a point we made last week as well, you want to ignore their protests, their outbursts, and any challenging questions that they pose, but you're not fully ignoring the child. You're not just walking away or anything like that. You're ignoring the problem behaviors, not ignoring the child. And Avoid pleading with them or giving in to them. If you start pleading and going back and forth with them, that just escalates the power struggle and makes it continue a little bit more. So really just kind of boil it down to what the clear expectation is, and that's really the only communication you're having with your child at that time. You're letting them know what the expectation is, and you're not really engaging in any other conversation with them at that time. And then you can answer information seeking questions. So, in the example of cleaning up, if the child holds up a toy and they're like, "Where does this go?" you should answer that question, because at that point they're starting to engage in cleaning up, and that is a valid question that needs an answer. But if their question is more like, "Well, why don't you just put this away?" That's not an information seeking question. That is a challenging question. They're trying to challenge your authority in that point. So kids are really good at this too. Like, I don't even think they need any real training around how to pose challenging questions. They're just able to come up with them pretty quickly on their own. And then once you've stated the expectation clearly, you're ignoring their protests and outbursts, ignoring their challenging questions. You may have answered an information seeking question. At this point, your next strategy is to continue to redirect them to the expectation. And when I say continue to do it, I don't mean repeat yourself over and over and over again. I mean, state the expectation, wait a couple minutes for them to follow through with your request, and then if they haven't done it yet, then you're stating the expectation again. So you are repeating yourself, but wait a couple minutes in between, because restating an expectation can very quickly turn into nagging and escalating the power struggle more. And then when it's possible, you want to remove access to other reinforcement outside of following through with the expectation. So the moment they start cleaning up, or the moment they, get ready to get into the bathtub, or whatever the expectation may be, that's when you start giving them a lot of praise and reminding them of what they're going to be able to do next. But whenever possible, you want to remove access to other reinforcements. So if you're trying to have your child clean up and they want to watch TV and the TV is on, then they don't really have any motivation to actually clean up. That's the time where you're shutting the TV off, you're moving the remote to a place that they can't reach, and really just removing that reinforcement. And then if the child goes and starts playing with their toys and they really need to be cleaning up so you can move on to something else, then you're just restating the expectation and blocking their ability to play with those toys at that time. Really just trying to help get them on track cleaning up. And then the other thing to do is really just, in that tug of war example, like, don't pick up the other side of the rope. Disengage from any of the back and forth. And I already said this in a couple of different ways, but it's really important that you check in with yourself and make sure that you're not contributing to a negative situation and escalating it further by upping the ante, or using frustrated tone of voice, or having a back and forth with the child. That can really just make the situation worse and typically doesn't have a good outcome for the parent. It usually ends up getting the parent to a point where they're frustrated, and the child ends up kind of getting what they want. And then you just continue to redirect them back to the expectation. And something I didn't add on here really clearly, but is extremely important in this situation: the moment that they start complying with your direction, give them some verbal praise, or chip in and start helping. Like, "Oh, hey, I see that you're putting the blocks away. I'm going to help you by putting the dolls away for you." And really just find an opportunity to show them that you recognize that they're following your instructions, you recognize that they're following through, and that you're not angry with them or mad at them. You're just ready to chip in and help yourself, or letting them know that you're happy with them for doing that. Okay. So some tips on recognizing your own behavior, because like I said, power struggles are two people or more. And it's important that the parents or the caregivers are really aware of their own behavior in that situation, because they are on the other side of that rope. So you really want to recognize what do you feel like when you are in a power struggle with your child? And what do you feel like when you're actually redirecting and following through? Those feelings internally are probably pretty different for most people. If you're in a power struggle, your emotions or behaviors might spike. This isn't the same for everyone, these are just examples. You might notice that you're starting to plead with them, or over explaining things to them, setting some limits that are not easy to follow through on, like the example of, if you don't clean up, I'm going to throw away all of your toys. It's not something that's going to be followed through on. You might be looking for an out or feel like giving in just to stop the behaviors from occurring in that moment. Or you could be focused on winning. Sometimes when you get into a power struggle, it's less about whether or not those toys are cleaned up and more about who had the last word. And often it's actually better to let the child have the last word while they're cleaning up their toys or in bath. They can still be angry and they're entitled to their emotions, but if you find yourself needing to have the last word, and you're saying something, they're cleaning up and you're like, well, I told you were going to clean up. That kind of punishes them for following through on what you said. So, ignore some of the verbal stuff at this point. And then, you notice that the child's still engaging in avoidance or is actively refusing, and you find that you're focused on getting out of the situation. You're focused on a short-term solution instead of focused on the long-term goal. The long-term goal being, when you ask your child to do something, they actually do it. So also, it's important to recognize what's your behavior like when you are redirecting and following through. It's pretty likely that the child's emotions and behaviors might spike a lot when you start following through, especially if it's something where they've been able to kind of get their way on more than one occasion. You would notice in yourself that you're more focused on the long term. You're less worried about the outbursts that they're having in that moment, and more focused on the long-term goal, which is either getting that activity finished, or even more long-term, the likelihood that they'll follow your directions more in the future. And then you're keeping the desired outcome primary. You're not focused on winning. You're not focused on the last word. You're just focused on, okay, this is the outcome I'm looking for. So I'm going to, hold strong and push through this, and not get into arguments with my child about cleaning up. The other thing that's really important is when parents are redirecting and following through, if it's working, you are calm. You might be frustrated internally, but your external emotional output is calm. There's not frustration in your voice. And like I said, that doesn't mean you can't feel frustrated. I mean, we all feel frustrated when we're trying to get something done and it's not happening. But if you have a plan and you're following the plan, it really will help you remain calm in the moment, because you know exactly what you're doing and exactly what you're working for. And the other really great side effect of redirecting and following through is that no matter what, the child eventually does follow through. If the expectation is to clean up your toys, yeah, they might have a tantrum or throw a fit, or throw more toys on the floor. But in the end, if you're really following through and holding your expectations and being reasonable about those expectations throughout, eventually the child is going to comply with the request. It might not feel like it, and in the moment, you might get really frustrated, but they will eventually do that. And then some other considerations. So we talked about this a little bit, but is the child's request reasonable? If what they are asking for is reasonable, then find a way to use that as motivation for them to complete whatever your request is. And then again, is your request reasonable? And I'm not going to harp on that any longer. I just really think it's important sometimes to take a step back and really think about what we're asking of our children and if they know how to do what we're asking. And then another thing to keep in mind is we don't want just like little robots who don't think for themselves. It's okay for kids to want to do different things, and we do want to support their growth and their autonomy. So, whenever possible, you want to allow your child to choose when they complete must do activities. So, something like brushing their teeth, it's not negotiable that they brush their teeth, but what is negotiable is when they brush their teeth. So that's a really good one for you to just say, do you want to brush your teeth um, before breakfast or after breakfast? I mean, ideally it would be before breakfast, right? But hey, maybe in their minds, after breakfast makes more sense because then they can brush the taste of breakfast off their teeth. So that's a reasonable place where you can just say, okay, I'm willing to be a little bit more flexible on when this happens. And another way you can support their autonomy and their growth is using things like chore charts or daily schedules and having them have input again on when those things are completed. So they know what their expectations are for the whole day. And yeah, you might want them to clean up all of their toys before lunch, but if they're helping you make a daily schedule or set up a daily routine, cleaning it up after lunch has the same impact. The toys are cleaned up. So being a little bit flexible with them and planning ahead is a really good way to help them grow and help them not only get what you're hoping to have achieved done, but also learn some skills for planning and time management at the same time. And you should rely on your routines. You know, some routines, if you really get those down packed, you can really look back to that routine and just say, you know what? No, we always wake up and brush our teeth. So you're gonna wake up and brush your teeth again today. So let's just get it done and we'll move on. And having little routines throughout your day takes away some of the opportunity for power struggles because it is just the ongoing expectation, and that expectation doesn't change day to day. And then having them earn access to preferred activities for completion of must do activities. So if you know your child is really, really into playing games on their tablet, then you would only allow them access to that tablet once their must do activities are complete. And if you really just make that your ongoing expectation, then it even takes away the pressure on the parents to be giving those prompts verbally or to be reminding the child, because once that's established as part of just what you do and how they get access to that, they're going to start doing the expected activities themselves and then coming to you and being like, hey, I just finished cleaning up, can I have my tablet? You know, they'll start working for that without you having to say anything about it. And then I just want to remind everybody, focus on the long term. Whenever we're dealing with changing difficult behaviors in children or in other people, it usually gets worse before it gets better. I'd like to say that it doesn't, but that is one of those fundamental things in dealing with changing behaviors. It often gets worse before it gets better, and that might mean bigger escalations, bigger tantrums, louder screaming, more dumping of toys. But if you can stick to it and really each and every day stick with it, things will get better. And one of the things that I always suggest to parents that typically they don't necessarily want to do is just keep track. Write down a little log of how often they fought back with you, and then you have something to reference and say, you know what, on Monday he fought with me 6 times about cleaning up, and it's Friday and he didn't fight with me once. And you really can start to see the silver lining if you're just jotting it down or keeping a tally. And the other consideration I'd like to point out is getting the caregivers on the same page. I know this isn't always possible, especially if you're living in like split custody situation or have different daycare situations or anything like that. But as much as possible, try to get people on the same page and, really focus in on the most difficult behaviors that are occurring during these power struggles, and really as a team, as a caregiving team, agree that you are not going to engage in a power struggle about that anymore. It's just going to be clear expectations. And then if you're doing that, then that gives you the opportunity, if you are the primary parent who the child is arguing with, it does give the opportunity for you to switch out with that other caregiver and say, hey, his expectation is to clean up his toys. And right now, I'm just waiting for him to start cleaning up, but I'm going to have you come hang out with him while he starts cleaning up. And then that other parent would then, their expectation would be to give the direction again themselves to show, okay, it's not like you're getting out of it because dad's walking away or you're getting out of it because mom's walking away. You're still expected to clean up those toys. So having the same goal and then working towards it, you're definitely more likely to see decreases in power struggles over time. And that's actually everything. So this is a little bit of a shorter training today. I just want to remind everyone of Autism AI's website, and we are still offering some services here during our closure. So if you're looking for individual services for your child, you can email our referral, Vermont referral at autismai.com. I also just want to point out to the Head Start parents in the Northeast Kingdom that you're able to access some consultation with me directly for your children through our partnership with Head Start. So please don't hesitate to reach out directly to me. And that is my email. So if anybody is interested in reaching out, shoot me an email and I'm happy to set up a consult time with you. Does anybody have any questions, any comments? We are still recording, so anything that you want to include in the recording?
I just want to share after the routines video that we did. This is Jen from Head Start. I set up like a visual schedule for my 8-year-old because he was having a hard time, like as far as getting his schoolwork done. And so we set up, I just drew some pictures of like a book and somebody writing, for the main, the main categories of schoolwork that he needed to complete every day. And then I allow him to choose what he wants to work on first. So there's reading, writing, math, and then he has like a creative, like just something that's creative. So that can mean sensory, going outside, playing Legos, whatever. It's kind of a freebie. So I noticed that every day he wanted to pick the creative one first. And at first I thought, maybe I should not let him choose, but it's been working out. And I think for him, having some like downtime before he has to get into his school stuff has been helpful, but definitely having that schedule is key because we've had a lot of power struggles before we had it, where he would be like, why are you making me do this? You're not my teacher, and, things like that. And so I would just refer him back to the schedule. Hey, these are the things that you must do today. This is not me. This is your schedule. These are the things that you do every day at school. We have to keep your routine similar. So letting him have some choices over, when and what he wants to do, and has really been helpful. I know most of our Head Start families have younger kids, so their schoolwork is a little different. But if you have older kids with, older siblings, it's really been a saving grace for us.
I'm really happy to hear that you kind of applied some of what we talked about in that training and that it's working for you. And again, I think having routines really, really contributes to decreasing the chance that you'll end up in a power struggle in the first place, because having that routine and allowing choices, no matter the age of the child, really can help you maintain some more control over assuring that the outcomes you're looking for happen, while the child still feels like they're in control. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and whatever he picks, there's 2 choices. So, and I'm okay with whatever he picks, but either he's gonna, if he's reading, he might be doing, There's some apps that have little reading games, or he might be reading a real book. So, but he gets some choice in what the work that he's doing is. And that's been helpful too. And I just make sure that I pick things that I'm okay with, whatever he decides. So um, having him be able to have the choice of like what he wants to work on and when he wants to work on it, but knowing that, hey, for these 3 hours, this is what we're doing, has been really helpful. And also, I do give him I just wrote them out on paper, 3 little break cards. So if he's starting to get frustrated with something, he can just hand me a break card and say, I need to take a break. And then I set the timer for either 5 or 10 minutes, and he comes back when it's done. And it's been working out really well.
That's a really awesome strategy. I think, especially if you're trying, if the kid is really like working hard and they're just and he's trying to get it done, but he's just kind of hit his wall. We all do that. I mean, if you're at work, you might hit a point where you're like, you know what, I can't figure out how I want to word this document that I'm writing, so I'm gonna get up and walk around for a couple minutes. Like even adults don't have the expectation that they sit there and they work nonstop beginning to end. So giving those opportunity for breaks is a really great strategy to use for him, and it gives him a little control. It's kind of like a get out of jail free card.
Yep. But it's timed, and I always set the timer because I'm not gonna have to. I don't want to have to be the one to tell him the break's over.
Right.
So I just set the timer on my phone. He hears the little chime. It's over, and he hasn't given me a hard time about it. He did realize pretty quickly though that if he used like his breaks back to back to back, that then he had none for later when he actually got frustrated. So I kind of let him do it just so that he would learn that, oh, shoot, like I burned through all my breaks like first thing and now I don't have any more. So he hasn't done it again. But
yeah, that's awesome.
Learn that little lesson.
I would like to add something that I have seen work where the power struggle with snacks. This is Sarah from AAI. We have got little baskets for the children. After breakfast, they pick out their 3 snacks for the day, and it gives them the choice on what they get to have for snack, but then it shows them these are the snacks for the day. So there is no question on if they can have a snack. They look, if there's only 2 snacks left or 1 snack, they might question if they want it and save it for later or have it then.
That's also a really good strategy. It takes the question out of it if you have everything already out and available that is available, then there's not really any opportunity for arguing or negotiating or anything like that because they have their options available.